The offseason is now in full swing for the Philadelphia 76ers as they await for that faithful NBA draft lottery date and begin planning for the future. However, an interesting opportunity or rumor has popped up as the draft circles begin to spin that could impact the Sixers team. I want to talk through a hypothetical situation that could pop up here as it pertains to a particular Duke product not named Cooper Flag. Do you want to dive right into things here and start off with this report from Brett Siegel of Clutch Points, who tweets out, "Don't be shocked if multiple teams look to trade up for Maluach. The Duke product is the exact type of athletic big man teams are looking for, especially a team like the Lakers." So obviously the Lakers have been eliminated there, and I don't want to tie this conversation too directly to them, but this is a fit. That is the type of player that they should be looking for. And for Maluach specifically, to give a little bit of his backstory here, sort of a surprise prospect that emerged on the scene this year. A really cool story when you dive into his pathway to this point. Born in South Sudan, picked up basketball pretty late in life, I believe at the age of 16. Sort of similar to the outlook to a guy like Joel Embiid, obviously starting his time in Cameroon and making a pretty meteoric rise to legitimate relevancy in the basketball world. Maluach seems to be following in those footsteps, and honestly, you can make a fairly convincing case that the version of Maluach leaving Duke was a more polished product than the version of Joel Embiid leaving Kansas. Now, with those conversations, I do think we sometimes brush over those 2 seasons that Joel Embiid had off to basically figure out basketball was so advantageous to his overall growth and pretty unique situation there. But in Maluach's favor here, he does not have sort of the same injury concerns that have been with Joel Embiid since he first popped in the league here. Now, this is not to make it a direct common Maluach versus Joel Embiid conversation here, but to bring it back to this conversation on the potential of moving up, that is the conversation I want to have. So for this Sixers team, and we are still talking through the hypotheticals as May 12th is that fateful day where we will find out where the Sixers draft pick will lie if it does fall within the top 6 and keeps retained there. And once again, a reminder in that is if it falls in selections 1 through 6, it is the Sixers draft pick. If it falls outside of that window there, it goes to the Oklahoma City Thunder as if they need any more help. And to give a peek at the lottery odds for these chances of happening, the Sixers have a 10.5% chance of the 1 pick, 10.5 at 2, 10.6 at 3, 10.5 at 4, 2.2 at 5, 19.6% chance at getting the 6th pick there. It overall totals up to about a 66% chance of the Sixers retaining the pick. Frankly, they did a good job tanking during the tail end of the season to maximize these overall opportunities, but it is at the fate of the lottery balls at this point in time. Now, when speaking about Maluach specifically, he is a guy who has a little bit of a range in how he's viewed. That ultimately, a lot of guys, and there are those out there that will tooth and nail fight you, that he deserves to be a top 3 pick. I certainly have read that on the timeline, and out of people whose opinions I respect in regards to prospect. Looking at Tankathon right now, has him slated as the 7th overall prospect being drafted by the Toronto Raptors there. It would not shock me whatsoever if this is a guy who is a pre-draft riser here. Now, I will say I am high on Maluach. I do think that he's going to be a legitimate high-level NBA player, and I do think there's a world where a couple years down the line, he could develop into an all-star. But there is still a rawness to his game that, is going to come with the territory there. You're going to have to be patient as an organization. But where that brings me to this is, what if the situation is the Sixers draft pick, let's use number 6 as an example here, that it falls into that 6th pick, which is the most likely chance, obviously not directly here. Well, there's so much moving parts with the actual odds of it. And again, I do want to make clear for the lottery, they're only drawing for the top selections and just fill out accordingly from there. It is not just a lottery drawing for each specific selection here. It's just those top picks, and then it fills out accordingly. No, but to stick with this hypothetical, if the Sixers were to grab the 6th pick and there was legitimate interest from a notable franchise to go up and get Common Maluach here, would you be willing to trade out of that draft pick for future picks or whatever in order to replenish the closet and put this team in a better position moving forward? That is the question I wanted to pose here, and it's something that had not crossed my mind until this surfaced here. So to talk through this a little bit, I do want to first look at the future draft pick outlook for this Sixers team. And to take a peek at some of this here, they're in a better spot than I think a lot of people want to acknowledge. That obviously we know the situation with this year, and by the way, I do want to make clear that 2nd round pick that they have this year is a big deal. Going to circle back to that in a minute, but to move forward and look at the next couple seasons, they do have their own pick in 2026. They have in this 2027 a pair of 2nd round picks, so no first rounders in 2027 as of now. 2028, they have 2 first rounders there, one coming from the Clippers, which could prove to be very valuable, as well as their own. And then 2029 is going to be a big year, most specifically that Clippers draft pick. Now, I will say my optimism for the Clippers remaining relevant has increased since initially this deal went through. That there was a strong belief of mine, particularly when tying in all the factors of Kawhi Leonard's health, of James Harden's being who he is is, and who knows how much longer that he has playing at the age of 35 years old, that 2029 draft pick could end up being valuable here. Now, when looking at this purely from this current season for this Sixers team, I do see some value in that potentially coming to the table here. Now, we can't do the exact hypotheticals because obviously where their draft pick falls and what is being offered on the table play a notable role in whether or not they should accept that deal. But to think about it a little deeper, that is something that could make sense to me. That when thinking about this Sixers team, and once again, all bets would be off if they end up with the number 1 pick and a chance at Cooper Flag. Don't get it twisted with that. But with this theoretical here, if they fall on the back end of that top 6 selection area, this is where this starts to have some grounds for me. Every sort of equation that you boil down to what is the outlook for this Sixers team sort of hinges on what is the status of Joel Embiid. And unfortunately, at this current time, we have no updates, nor do I expect one, really until we see this guy playing basketball again. The only updates that we ever will really see throughout the summer is, he is progressing as expected, looking great out there. That's what we're going to get. The feeder, the PR, the everything that should sound great about Joel Embiid. And don't get me wrong, I'm not fully hating on that. I don't know what else they can do in this spot, but the fact of the matter being, that isn't exactly something that's going to inspire confidence in me that from day one, Joel Embiid is going to look like Joel Embiid next year. We're going to have to see to believe in a way with Embiid. But with that all being said, that sort of leaves expectations at an interesting point for next year. If Embiid returns and looks like the normal version of himself with Paul George, potentially on a comeback season, with Tyrese Maxey getting back on track to the superstar ascension that he was quite clearly on, and then the addition of a guy like Jared McCain, who we could, in this case, we want to talk through this exact comparison, sort of look at as our new rookie for this season. He obviously only played a handful of games, not nearly enough, and would have run away with Rookie of the Year if he was able to play a legitimate sample size of NBA games there. Obviously, that was not the case there, but he will be returning next season, and I'm really optimistic for what this guy can bring to the team. So I do think there's a world where this could be a little bit of a half-step year for the Sixers. And what I mean by that is they're certainly still all in and invested with the guys that are here, but it is not that much different from the guys that were here last year. And also, we cannot forget there is still a 34% chance of this draft pick not portraying whatsoever and ending up in the Oklahoma City Thunder's hand. That would absolutely be the worst case scenario from a Sixers perspective, and something that handcuffs them in a way that would be pretty damning for this offseason overall. Now, the one pick that they do know they have is at the beginning of the second round. I do want to give a little hat tip to Daryl Morey for this, as this was a draft pick that came in with the Quentin Grimes trade, not sent out here, that they got back their second round pick in addition to Quentin Grimes in that deal. By the way, a deal that continues to look better and better the more that it ultimately does play out there. But to look at the second round outlook here, don't pay too deep attention to these names, but did want to initially point out sort of the ballpark that they are in. It will be that 35th pick. That is one that we are guaranteed the Sixers will have or be making there. They definitely have it. We'll see if they end up making a selection, but that is a good spot to be in the draft here. Now, Daryl Morey is a wheeler and dealer. He will move around, move up, down, whatever the case may be, if he gets the opportunity in this draft. But having that 35th pick is a great spot because you can kind of sit there and see who are the guys falling out of the first round and why. Like, who are the players that we should be looking to get our hands on? And Morey's been quite open on his tactic of the best player available outlook. I totally get that, and I think that especially applies this year when we are in this little bit of limbo. But you can get a good player at that 35th pick, and I know this is not considered a deep draft class whatsoever, but there are guys that can be helpful, and particularly in the era of NIL. Frankly, take a peek at some of these names that are on here. Janae Broom, 22.9 years old. Boogie Flan is a freshman there. A guy like Ryan Kalkbrenner, been around forever at Creighton. A guy that I certainly have my doubts about from an NBA perspective as far as what his ceiling is, but you know what you're going to get from day one. There are these more win-now players than really ever before. Chaz Lanier down at Tennessee, that 38th pick currently slated to the Spurs at this point. That dude, 23 years old, has been kicking around forever, and I like his game quite a bit as well. A guy that will absolutely let it fly from deep. So I think if looking for an impact player, say that you do want to trade out of that first round and that there are opportunities that could be provided to the franchise by doing so, you can still walk away with something here. Now, there's a ton of moving parts that we're diving into, but that is kind of the question that I did want to put on the table for you guys is, would you to be open to this? I've for quite some time expressed my opinion that this is an absolute must keep the pick. I'm starting to open my mind and think about it a little bit, that if there is a world where that opportunity presents itself, I do think Daryl Morey would be itching to jump on it, and I do think it could make some sense if the right pathway plays out there. And as far as Maluach's exact projection to the Sixers team, there's a lot of people that are in love with him as a prospect as well. I see it. I like it. We will see what ultimately plays out to that. He is kind of be that bridge in a Joel Embiid conversation here that say Joel, the worst case scenario with his injuries do ultimately play out, which we obviously hope is not the case. You can start to look at Maluach as that next center here. I think he could grow into that. But I also think there's a world where, say, this is the best version of Joel. There's not very many better players from a pure basketball skills conversation that he can learn to play behind here. They obviously have a somewhat similar background in the way that they've been, brought up and made their pathway to this point, that I think there could be some sort of connection there. And at the minimum, he could be a guy scaled up in his role in the nights where Joel Embiid does not play. And I think even under the best of circumstances, we are speaking about Joel Embiid probably playing 50 games tops, being optimistic with that moving forward from here. So I get the case. There is still a backup center conversation to be had on the Sixers roster that, yes, I like Dembona. Thought he showed a lot down the stretch. Yes, Andre Drummond will be kicking around and still with this organization next year, but that isn't exactly what I would rest on as an organization right now. So for the time being, a lot more questions than answers, but did want to throw this to you in your guys' directions. What would you do in that situation? Hypothetically, if the Sixers do get that 6th pick, is that something that they should consider moving out of if you can get something that improves this team? Or do you believe it is so important to get a prospect? I've leaned towards the second half of things for quite some time, but am warming up to the idea that if the right opportunity jumps on the table, they should jump on it there. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. I appreciate you as always tuning into these videos here to us here on Sixers Digest. If you have not already, make sure you are hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like on this video, and I'll be back talking to you next time. Peace.